Okay, the question is, should we all move to Africa in case TEPCO fails at removing the spent fuel rods? Well, number one, that's an impossibility. There are billions of people in the Northern Hemisphere, and what happens is that if there's a huge release of radiation from Fukushima by accident or by the fuel rods burning or a fission reaction taking place, the radiation will circulate from west to east around the Northern Hemisphere, but the two air masses at the equator, the Northern and Southern Hemisphere air masses, do not mix. And so most of the fallout in the air will occur in the Northern Hemisphere. And it's a physical impossibility, of course, to move people to the Southern Hemisphere. Some people might do that. But it's a terrible situation because there's nothing medical people can do about decontaminating people. You can't decontaminate food. You can't decontaminate the air that people are breathing. So we're facing a potential catastrophe in terms of public health. What people should know, though, is that it takes a long time to get cancer after you've inhaled, breathed in or eaten radioactive materials, like any time from 2 to 80 years. But it is a very serious situation. The next question. I live in Tokyo and worry about health impact. When it comes to only cesium, soils here contain hundreds of becquerels per kilogram of cesium-134 and 137, and about 20% of foods have a few becquerels per kilogram to 10 becquerels per kilogram. Please let me know your opinion of health impact and reasons you think so. Well, first of all, parts of Tokyo are extremely radioactive. They've taken dirt from the streets and moss from the roofs and dust from vacuum cleaners inside apartments. And in some cases, there are very high measurements of cesium and strontium and other such elements. There are literally over 100 elements apart from cesium 137 and 134. So people in Tokyo actually, many of them are at great risk, number one. Number two, it's very difficult to know what to eat in Japan because you can't taste or smell or see radioactive elements in your food, and each dose of radiation you get adds to your risk of getting cancer. And as you eat more and more radioactive food, so more radioactivity builds up in various organs of your body. They are only testing a few foods in Japan. The government is lying to you, and they are encouraging the farmers in Fukushima to grow their food, which is really criminal because there's a hell of a lot of fallout on the ground in Fukushima, and the radiation concentrates back from the soil into the wheat, into the rice, and into the green vegetables, and into the milk and the meat and the like. They are even promoting Fukushima food in Korea when I was there, and in Taiwan, but also in Tokyo and other places, also in markets in England. So the situation is very grim, and I think if I lived in Tokyo, I would move south. And I would be very, very careful about what I ate. I would only eat food coming from the south of Japan, and I wouldn't eat any fish because they're pouring huge amounts of radiation into the Pacific Ocean every day, and you don't know which fish are radioactive and which are not. Is there any chance of getting a live feed yet? Yes, well, we're live at the moment. Next question comes from Anita Stewart. Oh, it's still starting soon. This was a technical question. Here's another question. Greetings, my dear Helen. Please share the chances of TEPCO repairing reactor number 4 successfully without incident. Look, I'm not a nuclear engineer. I'm not a nuclear physicist. I'm a pediatrician, a children's specialist doctor. I can't possibly say what the chances are, but the people I talk to who do know are really worried, including a nuclear engineer called Arnie Gunderson. The next question, Emmanuel Himes, is anyone getting live feed? I am not. they're wondering. Next question, Anita Stewart. Why don't you just openly say the truth? We have a global catastrophe and need all people of Earth to quit any other activities and focus on rescue. Well, that's right, Anita. But it's not all the people on Earth. What TEPCO and the Japanese government should be doing is urgently bringing in the best brains of the world. There's a huge company called Bechtel in America, which are engineers. They build nuclear power plants and they build actually nuclear weapons and the like. But that's the sort of company that has the expertise which could come in and really help. The Japanese are very proud and they tend not to want to ask other people to come and help them. Next question. The infrastructure covering an extensive landscape. So the more feasible option for India is nuclear energy. Oh, we're talking about India. The nuclear disaster in Fukushima and the German government's decision to halt nuclear power projects alone cannot be a deterring point for me. Nuclear, well, that person is wrong. Even if there are no accidents like Fukushima or meltdowns or huge release of radiation, nuclear power plants only last for 40 years before they become so fragile and brittle from the intense radiation they have received that they're dangerous and they have to be closed down. So then you've got to decommission the very radioactive power plant. You have to let it cool radioactively for about 50 years before you even try, because it's so dangerous, and much of it has to be taken apart by robots and remote control, but that's not the main problem. The main problem is radioactive waste. America's got 70,000 tons of it at the moment. Japan's got a huge amount. Japan, they don't know where to put it. It's a volcanic island, riven by earthquakes. There's nowhere to put radioactive waste. And the Environmental Protection Agency in America says radioactive waste must be isolated from the environment for 1 million years. That's a physical and scientific impossibility. All containers, whatever they put radioactive waste in, will rust, leak and crack within 100 years. And this radiation, which is so intense and contains over 100 different elements, americium, cesium, einsteinium, neptunium, plutonium, cesium, radioactive iron, radioactive copper, all sorts of radioactive elements will leak into the water supplies of the world, then get into the water and concentrate by orders of magnitude 10 or 100 times at each step of the food chain. Algae, then crustaceans, then little fish, then big fish, then us, or vegetables and milk and meat. And they concentrate most highly in human bodies. So over time, like hundreds of years, what we're leaving to our descendants will be literally epidemics of cancer, leukemia, genetic disease, of which there are 6,000, and severe congenital deformities. And if you want to see them, you go to a book called Chernobyl by the National Academy of Sciences and see the pictures of the grossly deformed children that have appeared after Chernobyl, and there are a lot of them. So we are really, by creating radioactive waste, we are damaging the very building blocks of life, DNA. There is no way you can justify nuclear power. None. Nuclear power anyway produces massive quantities of global warming gas because you have to mine millions of tons of earth to extract the uranium, and that's fossil fuel. You have to enrich it. In America, they've been using 2 huge coal-fired plants to enrich the uranium. It's a lie to say nuclear power produces no global warming. It does. But apart from that, from a medical perspective, how dare we damage the process of evolution? And we're not the only species with genes that will be mutated by radioactive elements. All species, and there are 30 million other species that cohabit the planet with us, will be damaged by this radioactive waste. And we keep making more of it every day. Each power plant makes 30 tons of radioactive waste every year. Now, I commissioned a report in America called Carbon Free, Nuclear Free, which you can download from the internet. And probably by 2030, if America really changed its attitude and stopped taking money from the fossil fuel companies and the nuclear companies and subsidized renewable energy, by 2030, America could have all the energy it needs from solar, from wind, from geothermal, from conservation, from tidal power, and so could India. And that's what India needs. There are millions and millions of poor people in India. If they all had solar panels on their roof, they could run their television sets and their stoves and the like. And that makes no global warming gas. It's a little bit made when you make the solar panels, but that's it. So it's an absolute lie to say we need nuclear, and I don't want you to say that anymore from a medical perspective. It's another question. Chernobyl happened. Wait a minute, I've lost it. Chernobyl happened in 1986 with very radioactive rain over Europe. That is correct. 40% of the European land area is now contaminated with radiation. There are wild boar in Germany that almost glow in the dark. They're so full of cesium-137 because they eat the truffles and the mushrooms, and mushrooms and truffles really concentrate cesium. But 40% of the food probably in Europe is radioactive. I do not buy European food, nor do I buy any Japanese food. Luckily, I live in Australia. But if you live in America, you don't have to eat Japanese or European food because you don't know what food is radioactive and what is not. It takes a long time to develop your cancer. And medically, you mustn't eat any radiation in food. And what's more, Europe will remain radioactive for hundreds or thousands of years. And that's so, too, with Fukushima. And a report from the National Academy of Sciences in New York about Chernobyl says by now, probably over 1 million people have already died of all sorts of diseases, not just cancer and leukemia, but many other diseases from the radioactive fallout in Europe, Belarus, Ukraine, Russia. And if you extrapolate that data to Japan, where the population is much more densely populated, we're going to see a lot of cancers. And already in the first 2.5 years, they've diagnosed or diagnosed 44 cases of thyroid cancer in children. Thyroid cancer is extremely rare. 1 in 1 million children get thyroid cancer. So this indicates those children and everyone else got extremely high doses of radioactive iodine and lots of other elements. So that bodes very badly for the future for the Japanese people. Next question. We have learnt of soya plants beginning to grow in Chernobyl. Why can't we do genetic study on them and adopt them in stable food crops to deal with radioactive exposure in farmlands? Let me tell you, there's a wonderful scientist called Dr. Timothy Mousseau, who's an evolutionary biologist, who is going into the exclusion zones, very radioactive zones around Chernobyl and Fukushima, to the detriment of his own health. And he's looking at the birds and the insects and the wildlife, plants in those areas, and finding, first of all, the birds, he's looking at barn swallows, have smaller than normal brains because brains are very sensitive to the effects of radiation, developing brains. Most of the male birds are sterile, which means that they will die out. They are covered with mutations. They've got crooked tail feathers, crooked wings, white patches on them. Many of them have cataracts in their eyes, and that is seen to a large extent now around Chernobyl and in Europe in human beings. And what happens to animals happens to humans, because we test all our drugs in medicine on animals before we give them to humans. So what we're seeing in the animals, which reproduce very fast and which can watch generations and generations, is what will happen in humans. Damaged genes in the testicles and ovaries and the sperm and eggs, they get passed on generation to generation to generation. And as I said, there are 6,000 genetic diseases we now know of, including cystic fibrosis, diabetes, hemochromatosis, I'm a carrier for that disease, dwarfism, inborn errors of metabolism. I could go on, and all of those diseases are going to increase in frequency down the time span because of radioactive pollution. It's an absolutely wicked, wicked, wicked industry which kills people. And the other thing you need to know is that any country that has a nuclear power plant has a bomb factory. Nuclear reactors manufacture 250 kilograms or 500 pounds of plutonium a year. Plutonium has a half-life of 24,400 years. It lasts for at least 250,000 years. You only need 5 kilos or 10 kilos to make yourself an atomic bomb. So fundamentally, if you've got 500 pounds of plutonium and you need 10 pounds for a bomb, you can make 50 atomic bombs every year. And America and Japan and South Korea are selling nuclear reactors all around the world. And so not only are we selling cancer and leukemia to future generations, we're selling atomic bombs. And so that causes proliferation of nuclear weapons and increases the threat of nuclear war. And you need to know that of the 20,000 nuclear weapons in the world today, Russia and America own 94% of them. And they're the ones that can blow up the world tonight. With a press of the button, they're all ready to go with a few seconds' notice. And the more countries that get nuclear weapons, like India and Pakistan and Israel and China and maybe Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates from their nuclear reactors, the more risk there'll be of a nuclear war and annihilation of all life on Earth. Next question. Is a delegation of experts ready to go at a moment's notice should Japan ask them to come? Well, the Secretary of Energy from America has just been in Japan. He's offered to help. As I said, the Japanese are very reluctant to receive help. They're very proud. TEPCO doesn't want to receive help. And so I'm not really sure if they will let people in right now to help them. I can't say. Okay, let me see. People have been saying for a long time that hemp is the answer to all environmental issues. No, that's not true. It's not an answer to radioactive pollution at all. Hemp is terrific for making paper and for clothes, and we should be using hemp instead of chopping down the forests of the world, which are the lungs of the earth, because trees inhale carbon dioxide. It's a fertilizer for their growth. They exhale oxygen, which we use to breathe. And so we should not be chopping the trees down at all. This is really serious in terms of global warming. Hemp's a wonderful material that can be used for all sorts of things, but it's not an answer to radioactive pollution. Why don't you just openly say the truth? We have a global catastrophe and need all people on Earth to quit other activities and focus on the rescue. I've already answered that. We need experts to focus immediately, the whole world to focus on this. I feel like I'm dead already and agree that it may be too late for me, but perhaps still I can do something good for my children and hopefully for grandchildren. So count on me. Let's clean the mess. Excellent. So what I would say to you, whichever country you live in, you close down all your nuclear power plants. America's got over 100 operating. They must all be closed down. I don't care what the laws say. Laws are written to protect corporations, not people. And you can't tell me the power of the people isn't greater than the power of the corporations if they decide. If you love your children and you love your grandchildren, take it upon yourself to shut down your local nuclear power plant. I'll help you. I'll help you. And that means all the nuclear power plants of the world, there are about 440 of the damn things. Russia's into them too. They're crazy. These nuclear power people are crazy. And they know what they're doing, furthermore, and they've known how radiation causes cancer since the beginning of the Manhattan Project when they made the nuclear weapons. Next question. Do you see faster progress on the construction of fusion reactors now? No, fusion reactors are a dream for the physicists. They haven't been able to construct a fusion reactor, and I think that will never happen. But as Einstein said, the answers to today's problems will not be produced by the same technology that caused them. We've got to change the way we think. And what Einstein said was the splitting of the atom changed everything, all reality, save man's mode of thinking. Thus we drift towards unparalleled catastrophe. He was right so many years ago, and why do we keep doing it? Why do we keep doing it? Are we really lemmings rushing towards the cliff of nuclear annihilation and global warming? Or do we have the emotional intelligence to change the way we think and decide to save this beautiful planet of ours and probably the only life in the universe? This is a very deeply spiritual and religious question for those who are religious. David Suzuki of Canada and Arnie Gunderson and me and a few others are speaking out. What hurdles do we need to cross to get this out to the media, as most think this is a conspiracy theory? Well, it's not a conspiracy theory, unfortunately, it's the truth. The media needs to get onto this immediately. It's the media that's determining the fate of the earth. As President Jefferson said, an informed democracy will behave in a responsible fashion. And the media is keeping people anesthetized, feeding them absolute rubbish, celebrity stuff, absolute rubbish. People are into manic denial, like food and clothes, and fashions, when in fact the earth, the very earth that we live on, is threatened and our children are threatened. Why even make our children clean their teeth and have immunizations and have a good education when clearly they have no future? And they don't, because global warming is so serious now that it's going to be 6 degrees hotter, it's predicted 6 degrees centigrade hotter by the end of this century. People can't live at those temperatures. So if we love our children, and if we really do love our children, we'll totally change the priorities of our lives. And everything else you do is unimportant, except to close down all the reactors and to make the governments put solar panels on every single building in America, in Europe, in England, in Australia, in Russia, all over the world, and just cover the place with windmills. It's what we've got to do if we want to keep using electricity. Otherwise, we have to stop using electricity. And think about it. Mozart wrote by candlelight, and so did Shakespeare. So the human race has lived for a very long time without electricity. Turkey will be setting the nuclear central in 10 years. What are you thinking on this subject? I went to Turkey 2 years ago to a big conference on nuclear power, and I went through all the medical consequences of nuclear power, and I pleaded with them not to build any reactors. And I must say that after I finished talking, I had a feeling that they really took no notice. I tell you what, if there's another terrible situation arising from Fukushima, which could well happen in the next few months or year, I think that will signal the end of nuclear power around the world. That's my prediction. Next question. How should we proceed with consuming fish and food from the seas now? The Pacific Ocean is becoming more and more radioactive. Mind you, it's a huge ocean, and the radiation going out into the Pacific, 400 tons of highly contaminated water every day, and has been since the accident began 2.5 years ago. That radiation becomes diluted, of course, but the solution to pollution by dilution is fallacious when it comes to radiation because, as I've explained, the food chain reconcentrates back the radioactive elements. The fish being caught off the west coast of America and Canada now should be tested. They're finding that tuna being caught off the coast of California contains cesium from Fukushima, and it's going to get worse. And so the EPA in America, Environmental Protection Agency, and the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, should be routinely testing the fish and the air, because if Fukushima blows again, we need to know what radiation is in the air. And the ambient levels of radiation in Seattle just after Fukushima blew the first time went up 40,000 times above normal, and there was fallout in Boston and indeed all around the Northern Hemisphere. So the government must be made to test. Where can we find results of feeding with food after Chernobyl? You can download a book called Chernobyl, that was published by the New York Academy of Sciences, I think in 2009. Read that. It's the scariest book I've ever read in my life as a medical textbook. Read it and learn about the food after Chernobyl and what's happening to the people. But there has been one village near Chernobyl that has been studied by a wonderful embryologist called Dr. Helen. And the people there have lived there for centuries, and they eat the local food, the berries and all the rest. And the pregnant women, they have a very high level of cesium in their bodies, as does everyone else. There's a very high incidence, I'm telling you, of congenital malformations in that village, including conjoint twins, Siamese twins, neural tube defects, spina bifida, babies born with no brains, anencephaly, or single eyes, or no arms. And if you want to find out about that, go to my webpage, helencaldicottfoundation.org, and there's a talk. You can download the symposium I organised at the New York Academy of Medicine in March this year, and you can listen to the presentations, but in particular go to Dr. Hele's presentation and listen to him and learn about the severe congenital abnormalities post-Chernobyl. We've been hearing about White House meetings with the Japanese and TEPCO to begin helping in cleanup. Is this true? Do you know, or have you heard of it? Yes, I do know that the Secretary of Energy, I can't really remember his name properly, Monitz, I think, has just been to Moscow. To Japan. He visited Fukushima for the first time. It's taken him a long time to get there, and he was terribly shocked. And he said that the Department of Energy would help, but I know that TEPCO is about, in the next few days, to start removing those spent fuel rods from reactor 4 in the cooling pool. And two things could happen. A rod could break and release a lot of radiation, and the workers would have to evacuate the whole of the Fukushima complex. That's terribly serious because they're needed there every day to keep things going. Or two rods could touch each other in this process, which has never been done before, and there could be a fission reaction and a very large release of radiation. So I don't know what the plans are. They haven't been enunciated. What would you not hesitate to eat along the Pacific coast of North America? Bluefin tuna, grapes, etc. Well, I don't think I'd eat fish course along the west coast of North America. I think the food's pretty safe at the moment, but, I mean, that's a guess. You should make sure that your government, state and federal, are testing your food so you know what's safe and what's not. I think at the moment it's probably relatively safe, but as I said, we're facing possible catastrophe. It's going to take them 14 months to remove those spent fuel rods from reactor 4 cooling pool. I mean, we're living with impending catastrophe every day. We live in Mississippi. Mississippi, and don't understand the numbers of radioactive levels. At what level do we keep our kids inside? I suppose that's America. Oh, don't worry about your children at the moment. They're fine. But you've got to worry about them if, in fact, there's another huge release of radiation from Fukushima. I mean, if there's another earthquake greater than 7, Building 4 could collapse and Building 3 could collapse. And massive amounts of radiation could be released to the environment. Then you keep your children inside. So you keep your ear on the news the whole time. Next question I've already answered. I think I've answered all the questions that are already on the list. As far as I know, I can't see any more questions.
Helen, could you please go to the chat? And there are some more questions.
Chat.
Yeah.
Q&A? Or do I just go to Q&A?
No, not Q&A, just chat.
Where is chat? I can't see chat. What does it look? Is it numbers? Is it at the top?
Icon on the top. Yeah, right.
Icon on the top. Yeah.
Okay, I got it.
Thanks.
I clicked on it. I clicked on it and nothing's coming up.
So you don't see question, you don't see people writing there.
I clicked on, there's a little 6 in a red box. It's a blue box with white lines across, and there are 6 or 7 questions there now, but when I click on it...
no, you don't have to click on them, you just read them and answer them.
I can't read them because they're not on the screen.
Oh.
I can't read them.
We can read them for you.
Chat.
We can read them for you. There is a question.
Read it out.
Great. There is a question from Adam Smith. Nuclear is the only option if you want cleaner skies. Nuclear is big in Europe. Nuclear is just not political correct. If you don't want nuclear, you must have dirty coal-powered stations. There is no free choice, free lunch.
That's not true. That is not true. That is not true. That is not true. I have already explained that if you download a study called Carbon Free, Nuclear Free from the net, it's a study that I set up and organized several years ago by a brilliant physicist called Arjun Makhijani. And it shows that all energy for Europe and for America and every country can be now supplied by renewable energy. Each day renewable energy gets cheaper and cheaper, cheaper by far than nuclear. We mustn't burn coal, you're absolutely right. But for God's sake, why don't the countries of the world pull their fingers out, stop subsidizing nuclear, stop subsidizing fossil fuels, and as I said, cover every house with solar panels, solar hot water systems, solar thermal systems like they've got in Spain, windmills, conservation. I've just been in Germany and Austria, and lots of the little farmhouses now are covered in solar panels. Germany's moving fast with renewables. Denmark is 40% of its electricity comes from wind. You are not telling the truth when you say that nuclear is the only thing. Nuclear provides global warming gas, as I explained. It will damage the human race and leave epidemics of leukemia, cancer, and genetic disease for the rest of time. Nuclear is a killing industry. It's a cancer industry. It's a bomb-making industry. It's a wicked industry. Wicked from a medical perspective. And you must never, ever say nuclear is the answer. Learn, understand. Go to my webpage, helencaldicottfoundation.org. Read every article there, and you will understand what I'm saying. Global warming is a catastrophe. Read my book if you love this planet. I wrote about global warming in '91. And I thought, well, everyone will read this. This is what the scientists are saying, and they'll fix global warming. Well, not very many people read it, and no one did anything about it. And that's where we are now. Most politicians are scientifically and medically illiterate. They don't know what they're talking about, and they're run by businessmen whose top and bottom line is money. It's greed and capitalism that's destroying the earth, which is what Pope Francis said the other day. I like this new Pope. But don't you ever, ever say that nuclear is the answer again. And before you ever talk about it, read my webpage and read my book, Nuclear Power is Not the Answer. Then you can come back to me. Next question.
And W. Whips asks, can they contain the damage at the Fukushima plant, and what does this mean for our Pacific Ocean? Will it recover?
Look, I'm very much afraid. I wrote 2 articles for Russia Today, and if you go to their webpage, you can read it. I'm very much afraid that radioactive water is going to flow into the Pacific at least for the next 50 years, or if not longer, and I'll tell you why. They built 6 reactors, not just on an earthquake fault, but on an ancient riverbed. And to the back of the reactors are mountain ranges, and the water flows down from the mountains underneath the reactors. Now, when the reactors were operating normally, they had pumps that pumped this water out from under the reactors. But there have been 3 meltdowns, and we think that these meltdowns, about 100 tons of radioactive fuel in each units 1, 2, and 3, may have melted their way into the Earth. It's called the melt through to China syndrome in nuclear terminology. Even if they haven't, They're on the bottom of the containment vessel building, which is made of concrete, which is all cracked. So the water's flowing down huge amounts every day across and bathing those reactor cores, which are furiously radioactive. And the water that's coming out and going into the ocean is incredibly radioactive. The other day, the radiation in the water went up 6,500 times above the levels they measured 3 days before. I can't tell you how radioactive this water is, and there's no way to stop it. They're thinking of building an ice wall, putting refrigerator rods deep into the earth, about 100 feet, at close proximity all around the reactor, and turning the earth into ice to prevent the water leaking out. Well, that will have to go on for the next 50 years, number one. Number two, if there's an electricity breakdown, the ice will melt. Number three, you'd have to use huge amounts of fossil fuel in coal reactors, the coal power plants, to make the ice, which is antithetical to survival of the planet. Arnie Gunderson, the nuclear engineer, suggested doing this, that they build a wall of zeolite. Apparently zeolite is like clay which absorbs cesium far to the west of the reactor, which would prevent the radioactive water under the reactor from mixing with the mountain water that comes down, and then build all sorts of pipes and tunnels to divert the mountain water, which would be clean, around the whole reactor complex into the sea, into the ocean. But I don't think they're going to do that. TEPCO is trying to save money. That's what they're doing. They're skimping on everything. I mean, they've got over 1,000 tanks containing huge amounts of radioactive water, and they're joined together by plastic tubing and duct tapes. The tank seals are made of plastic and rubber. Some of the bolts are now rusting. They were only built to last 5 years. If there's another earthquake, many of those tanks are going to burst, rupture, and all that radioactive water is going to go into the sea. Look, I tell you, this is a catastrophe, and the fact that the media is not attending to it and the average person doesn't know about it is also an absolute medical catastrophe. People are obliged to know the truth. The media is obliged to tell people the truth, and they're not doing it. In that way, I think they're criminals from a medical perspective. Just imagine if there was one case of rabies in New York. You don't tell me that wouldn't be headlines in the New York Post, a Murdoch newspaper. And yet this, I don't know how many people died in the Black Plague in Europe, but certainly I think more people have died from Chernobyl than in the Black Plague. And this isn't being talked about either. What on earth do we think we're doing? Any more questions?
And Tingali is asking, I'm not an advocate for nuclear energy. Why are we using uranium instead of thorium, which apparently is so much safer?
Well, that's a lie too. Thorium is not itself fissionable. So to have a thorium reactor, and thorium is quite plentiful in the crust of the Earth, you have to mix it with uranium-235, which is what normal reactors are now run with, uranium-235. And so you have to mix it with a fissionable isotope 235 to fission the thorium to produce uranium-232, which is terribly radioactive and dangerous, and 233, which can then be extracted by melting the fuel rods down in concentrated nitric acid from the thorium reactor, extracting 233, and then making more fuel rods with that and putting it in another reactor. It's economically totally out of the question. It's very dangerous because uranium-232 is just so incredibly radioactive. It will irradiate the workers extraordinarily. And if you want to read about thorium reactors, go to my webpage again. There's a whole section on thorium reactors written by physicists. Learn about it and never say that again, and educate your friends and get the word out about thorium. these physicists, you know, they're fascinated with fission. It's sort of almost a testosterone supplement. I think it makes them feel strong and powerful, because when you fission the atom, you actually harness the energy of the sun. They could easily put their minds to it and save the world with renewable energy. So please read the thorium section, and Google thorium too, but read my section in helencaldicottfoundation.org and you'll learn about that. Next question.
And also there is a question from Adam Swanson. He says that the point is we can't say we have to stop this disaster in Fukushima. He means has revealed some of the loopholes of nuclear energy. But saying we need to cancel Tokyo Olympics is like saying because of global warming we need to stop driving cars because some brainy scientists have told us to do so.
Yes, well, we don't have to stop driving cars. What we need to do is put solar panels on all the parking lots. And so you have an electric car. You plug your car in during the day when you're at work, it charges up, and you drive it home using solar power. And then you can plug it into your house and augment the solar power that's been collected by your house panels. Don't ever have an electric car that just plugs into the grid, because that's a carcinogenic car, because it's either coming from nuclear energy, which makes cancer, or it's a global warming car and it comes from the grid using coal. But certainly we can still drive cars, but not the cars we drive today. And as far as nuclear power goes, I think I've explained the dangers of that quite readily, and that we must not use nuclear power anymore. So global warming is an absolute catastrophe which must be attended to within the next 5 years. You know, we've got to reduce CO2 levels that we're producing by 25% at least by 2020. My government in Australia, oh, they've done a great job. They're reducing it by 5%. I mean, that's nothing. It's neither here nor there. America's not doing a thing about it. Not a thing. Not a thing. Really, the fate of the Earth rests upon the American people, because they're the ones who are leading the charge into global warming, into nuclear, and all the rest, or have always led the charge. And everyone emulates or copies America because of its great advertising capacities throughout the media in the world. How you wake up 270 million people in America who've got full bellies and are very comfortable and are brainwashed, I don't know, without the help of the media. If we had the help of the media, we could certainly wake them up and educate them, because the Americans are really good people and they really, really want to do the right thing. But most of them, many don't know what the right thing to do is.
Can we ask another question?
Yep.
There is a question from Onidas. I think that's the way to pronounce it. People will need to be aware of what type of protective clothing to wear and when to wear it, what foods to avoid, when to stay indoors, what supplements they need to take and when to take them, and what other steps they need to take to reduce the effects of exposure. They will also need to know how they can be exposed to radiation, so whenever possible, steps can be taken to avoid it.
Look, it's very interesting. I get that question all the time. You know, if you have a headache, you take aspirin, or you take Tylenol, or you take Panadol. If you have a backache, you take an anti-inflammatory. If you have nausea, you take an antiemetic. I mean, we now in modern medicine can keep people alive a long time. We're really quite brilliant. And so people naturally think that there's an answer to radiation. I'm sorry to tell you there isn't. There's nothing you can wear to protect yourself except a lead suit. Only lead stops radioactive rays passing through your body. And even the workers at TEPCO just wear plastic. Doesn't help them at all. You'd have to stop breathing if you wanted not to inhale radioactive materials. If TEPCO blows and there's a lot of radiation in the air, you have to keep breathing. There are no supplements you can take, none, that will mitigate the effects of radioactive elements once they're in the body. You can, if You are near a nuclear reactor and it is melting down, and they tell you in time as it melts down before the radiation blows over you and you inhale radioactive iodine in the radioactive cloud of elements. Take potassium iodide, which is benign and inert, which blocks the uptake of radioactive iodine in your thyroid gland. It saturates it. But it only decreases the development of thyroid cancer by 70%, so it's not full protection. But usually, you know, there's so much confusion of the people working at the reactor if it's a meltdown. They don't tell you. They didn't tell you about 3 Mile Island. They didn't tell people in Chernobyl for, you know, days and days. And they didn't tell people in Fukushima, even though they knew where the radioactive cloud was blowing. They didn't tell the people who were fleeing the accident because they didn't want to create panic. Can you imagine that? They didn't want to create panic, so the people breathed in and were exposed to very high levels of radiation. I'm afraid you probably won't hear in time about a meltdown, and all radioactive iodine does is protect the thyroid, but all cancers of all organs can be caused by radiation and radioactive elements. So I have to tell you, and I'm sorry to say this as a physician, that there's nothing you can take to protect yourself. Now, in medicine, there's a dictum which says, if you have an incurable disease, the only recourse is prevention. And it wasn't until Jonas Salk and others and Sabine found the polio virus that we could then immunize people against it and eliminate polio. If you don't know the cause of a disease, or you must, or if the disease is incurable, you must prevent it. So the only way to prevent being exposed to radiation is to close down all the nuclear reactors in the world, to eliminate all the nuclear weapons in the world, and to get into renewable energy. Then you're still stuck with the radioactive waste, which is the legacy we leave to our descendants, which is really criminal. So I guess I'm talking about revolution. We've got to change the way we think, the way we behave. We live in a democracy, most of us that I'm talking to. Living in a democracy involves great responsibility. It doesn't mean voting every time you have to vote. And incidentally, in Australia, voting is compulsory. And voting should be compulsory. Everyone should be made to vote. If that was so, America would have a free healthcare system for sure. But living in a democracy, it involves more than voting. It means getting to know your representatives, your senators, your congresspeople, members of parliament, and educating them. You are their leaders. They are your followers. They represent you. President Obama is not the leader. You are his leaders. And if you don't get to know them and teach them and demand that they behave in a responsible fashion, from an educated fashion, then you're abrogating your responsibilities in a democracy, and you can't complain. I mean, we're so lucky to live in a democracy. How many people are dying around the world to have themselves a democracy? We've got to use it. The power lies with the people, you and me, grandmothers, grandfathers, mothers and fathers, children. There's the power. And if you abrogate your power, into that vacuum step the corporations, and that's exactly what's happened. Next question.
Conclusion.
There is a question from Sherry Wyman, and I think this will be the concluding one.
Okay.
She says, I live in North America. Should we be planning to evacuate Michigan? I know Florida is better as far as the radiation goes. That's as far as I can go at the moment.
Say it again. I live in Michigan and what?
I know Florida is better as far as the radiation goes.
Oh, Florida. Look, if if there's another huge release of radiation, no state in America or no country in the Northern Hemisphere will be safe. It will blanket the whole of the Northern Hemisphere. That's the truth. So you better get going, you know, all you people. You better absolutely deluge your Congress and your Senate with requests or demands that America immediately go and help the Japanese in Fukushima and demand that all your reactors be closed down. That's what you do. That's called preventive medicine. Preventive medicine. It involves a lot of work, but by God, it's worth it. It means if you love your children, that's what you'll do.